Hi, everybody. Welcome to Foster Friday Live. We are so glad that you are joining us today, and we are just absolutely thrilled to welcome Renee, who is here with us today from Foster Source. And we are jumping into June, which is crazy. June happens to be National Family Reunification Month, so we're really excited about that. And we're coming off of Foster Care Awareness Month. So as we talked to so many of you last month that were interested in becoming foster parents or considering what your role in foster care might be, we thought what better topic for us to talk about this month than, okay, I want to foster, now what? What do foster parents and professionals wish that those considering foster care knew before getting started? So would you mind just introducing yourself, Renee, and telling us a little bit more about your family?
Yeah. Well, good morning here in Denver. Good afternoon up to you on the East Coast. Thank you so much for having me, Kaylee. I'm really honored to be here. My name is Renee Bernhard, and my husband, Brian, and I were foster parents here in Colorado, and we are adoptive parents in Colorado. And when we closed our home to further foster placements, we formed our nonprofit Foster Source to provide things that we feel like would have made us foster better and foster longer. And we are now in our fifth year. We have our fifth year birthday this summer. And yeah, I'm very passionate about foster care. And I think you introduced that perfectly, that not everyone can or has to foster. There are so many different ways to get involved in child welfare, and that's exciting.
So bring us back to, years ago, your family was considering foster care. What kind of got you to that point where you guys were not only interested, but you decided to say yes? And then can you give us a little snapshot of what that foster parenting experience looked like for you?
Yeah, so we always kind of had it in the back of our minds. And I think a lot of people have that. They think, oh, I've considered fostering. And then a foster family moved in on our street. And we got to know them. They had two biological children. They had a privately adopted son from Guatemala, and they had just taken in a sibling group of three, foster care.
Wow.
And we got to know them. And these kids were so much fun and so sweet. And I think for us, that was the little nudge we needed, that, okay, yes, this is what we want to do. We had two biological children at the time. At the time, they were 5 and 12. So we had no intentions of adopting. We were kind of just everybody should help if they can. We were of that mentality. And so the day came when we were certified, and we had said to the caseworker, look, give us one and make it an easy one. Like, we're trying to set ourselves up for success here, right? Which I now realize was such a silly request. But she said, obviously when we pull kids, we pull all of them. So the likelihood of a single is low, but we'll put you on the list. And we said, great, let us know. That was at noon that day. And by 3 p.m., we had a newborn in our home, and we had no plans to take, I think we had said age 11 and under. So we had never even imagined that we would get a newborn. And thus began our 3-year journey as foster parents. We had a total of 10 kids over those 3 years. And we did end up adopting that initial placement after 2 years. But I think the whole experience was very different than we anticipated, for sure.
And certainly you're not alone in feeling like, wow, I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't this.
No, no.
So, looking back, fostering for 3 years, 3 years in the span of a lifetime might not seem like very long, but in the lifetime of a foster parent, that's a pretty long time. So, looking back and knowing everything that you know now from fostering, from running this nonprofit, what would you tell your pre-fostering self, at that stage of consideration, that stage of the licensing process? What do you wish that you would have known?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. The first is that love is not enough. You know, parenting a child from trauma is so different than parenting a neurotypical child. So those classes that your counties and your agencies are offering you about trauma and behaviors, take full advantage. Even if you already have your hours, just educate yourself as much as you can about trauma, the brain, how prenatal trauma affects the child, and early childhood trauma affects the DNA of a child. It can sometimes rewrite their DNA. So it's very, very important to understand that things that present as behavior are actually not behavior at all. They're a child trying to process his or her trauma. And when you understand that, you can approach the situation completely differently and much more appropriately to not only diffuse the situation, but to properly walk that child into healing.
Right.
The other big one for me is I did not realize how much we would love the bio parents. I think when you initially are going to your classes, a lot of foster parents are worried, maybe even about their safety. And the county is very reassuring and well-intended in reassuring foster parents. But what that sometimes does is builds up this wall from the very beginning between the foster parent and the bio parent. And that's really damaging. For us, it wasn't until about 8 months into the case when we had a very cathartic moment with our son's birth mom, where our walls dropped and we both finally just saw each other vulnerably, and kind of we wept and we held each other. And from then on, it was a completely different case. A lot of times the bio parents were in care themselves, and if they weren't given, or they didn't grow up with advantages and opportunities that we did. And that's really, really important to realize. Foster care is not an adoption agency. The goal is reunification, and we want that to happen. And the sooner we can work realistically and closely with bio parents, the better the case will be.
I think what you said, working realistically, I think sometimes we just, before we enter in, it maybe seems impossible. We just don't know how, but there are realistic, practical, tangible ways that we can do it. So, with that perspective shift, you even said, it took 8 months for that moment for those walls to just kind of fall down. How could you have even, if you were talking to yourself before you started, or you were talking to another family, which you do often, who was getting started, and maybe you noticed some of those walls were up about, you know, working with the child's family or loving the child's family or championing reunification, how could you help them maybe identify false perspective, or prepare for just how foster care kind of flips your worldview upside down?
For sure. And it's a struggle, right? Because our job is to care for the child. And we've been given this child, and now we know why they're in care. And sometimes that's hard. It's really hard to swallow. But I think to get to that point where you can really work together with the bio parent, the key is to go inward. We need to check our privilege at the door. I needed to check my privilege of having grown up in a stable home with a 2-parent family and a father figure, and and realize that that's not everyone's story. That's not everyone's truth. And we are meeting bio parents where they are. And I think, I remember in our certification class, the day they had the foster parent come in. And for me, it was like the Queen of England. I was like, oh, I'm getting to see a real foster parent and hear from a foster parent. And I feel like if they had included a bio parent as well, that would have completely changed that journey for me. I see it completely differently now. And I'm liking where child welfare seems to be trending in this direction. Because I used to think, I mean, I'm so embarrassed to say most of this, but when we first fostered, I thought, what child wouldn't love to come into our home and our family, and we have wonderful meals, and no child wants to be away from their family. No matter, that's just silly. So there's just a lot of, you really have to check yourself. As embarrassing as it is, but when we know better, we do better.
So, and I think you've given us some great things to think about already. But if we could just, for those considering foster care or just getting started, or, they're in this just wildness, this survival mode of an early placement, what advice do you have for just really thriving as a foster family?
For sure. Two things. Number one, find your community. Find those other foster parents. Go to support group, and don't wait until you're in crisis mode to go to support group. You will learn that you need to vent. You need to vent. You need to celebrate. You need to cry. And as well-intentioned as our friends and family are, those other foster parents are going to understand you best. That's one of the reasons at Foster Source, we don't have anyone from the county at support group. And it's not a gripe fest to sit and gripe about our caseworker or whatever. It's really just a chance to be really vulnerable and say, this is so, so hard. I love this child so much, and I wish the judge had decided this instead of this. And then just kind of, when you can process that and get that off your chest, you can get up the next day and continue. The other piece of advice I would have is that you have a voice, and it's your job to use it and advocate not only for yourself, but for the child. A lot of times foster parents kind of just do what they're told, which is good. But you also have to realize that you're parenting the child 24/7. You know what the child needs, and don't be afraid to be the squeaky wheel. You have a voice. What we hear from foster parents so often, particularly newer foster parents, is they're afraid the county will pull the child if they complain, if they advocate too much, if they ask for too much. And obviously that couldn't be further from the truth, right? The county does not want to pull the child. They, in most cases, probably have nowhere to take the child at that time. But it's okay. It's okay to call your caseworker supervisor. It's okay. You need to really be the squeaky wheel for yourself and for your child.
Certainly. And it's in those early moments of learning and kind of leaning in and hopefully relying on other foster families who have kind of done this a little bit longer, that families can begin setting themselves up for success with habits like communicating and
Yes.
advocating and finding support. And I heard yesterday from someone from one of our private licensing agencies that the families they see thrive are the ones that ask for help,
Mhm.
that take opportunity of respite, that, identify support and then utilize it,
Yes.
that show up for those opportunities to be in community with other foster families and professionals that can provide
Yes.
them with good advice.
For sure. And I mean, that is exactly at Foster Source what we're trying to do with our newest program is Therapeutic Services. So we've been matching the foster parent with their own virtual therapist.
Mhm.
And right now it is mostly putting out fires, right? It's the county calling saying this parent wants to disrupt, and we really need her. That's the parent right now that we're matching with the therapist. The goal is obviously, congratulations, you're certified. Here's your therapist. Meet him or her now, so that when you're in crisis, you can jump right in and not have to worry about, is this a good fit? Here's my background. Um, I agree to use services and resources early on and often.
So I think that was the perfect segue. Tell us more about Foster Source. How did this idea come about, and what do you do? What does Foster Source do, and why is it important?
Yeah, so we really focus on serving the child by serving the foster parent, the caregiver. So we have an education wing where we do trainings and support groups for foster families virtually during the pandemic, but in person before then. And we have our first in person coming up again in June. We serve statewide in Colorado, and we always do free childcare, which is so hard to find in foster care, and it is the hardest event to find a volunteer for because it's crazy, but it's also one of the rare times that kids in care get to spend with other kids in care. So it's really, really important that we provide that. We do relief services, things like we need bunk beds, we need mattresses, we need a weighted blanket. Our child has been taking boxing lessons and it's helping process his anger. We'll sponsor that for a few more months to keep that going. And then we do therapeutic services, which is our virtual therapy for foster parents. And we have an incredible equine program with a local ranch called Groundwork Ranch. And this is really fascinating because when people think, oh, equine therapy, foster parents riding horses in a meadow. No, that's not what it is at all. There's actually no riding involved. It turns out that horses as prey animals make every decision based on whether or not that decision ensures their safety in the next minute. They don't do anything to be nice. They don't do anything to be mean. They make every decision based on whether or not it's safe for them. And hello, that's exactly how children from trauma react. They live in fight or flight. So every decision they make is this safe for me? So they call it a parenting practice lab, and it's really incredible how you can learn by trying to get a horse to go through an obstacle course, leading a horse, which I wasn't a horse person before I did this program, but if you've ever tried to pull a horse, it's not going to happen. So the key is parents learn to regulate themselves because horses also take on our energy. So if we're anxious and uptight, they will be. And kids are the same way. So when we can regulate ourselves, step back, take a minute to connect. This program is so important. We are just like, every foster parent needs to take this class. It's a 5-hour workshop on a Saturday, and the parents just all really connect and are vulnerable with one another. And it's important because it changes the way they're parenting. Right? It's changing the way they parent, and not just the child they have now. It will change the way they parent every subsequent child that comes into their care. It's that impactful.
I don't know that I've ever heard of anything like that. That's so interesting. And it just is, I think that's something for me. There's always something new to learn. There's always something new to try. You're never going to be that perfect parent. You're always learning new things. And so I'm so interested to learn more about that.
Yes, it is. We are really, really proud of all of our programming, but the therapeutic services, particularly this year during the pandemic, have played an important role for foster families. And then our fourth program is that we are the Colorado home to CHAMPS. So CHAMPS is a national initiative, as you probably know. It stands for Children Need Amazing Parents, and it works to elevate the foster and kinship parent voice within child welfare, which is so important because all we're asking for is a seat at the table, right? And so being the Colorado home to CHAMPS is something we're really, really proud of too.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Renee. I just think you are a wealth of knowledge and so encouraging. As we wrap up, and I love to ask this question, and you can answer silly, sweet, sincere. What is one thing that has made the biggest difference in your foster care journey? Maybe that's right now or of all times. What is saving your life right now?
I would say, well, I'm going to say two things. I guess today my thing is just two things. First is that very first group of foster parents that we met with. I mean, that was the genesis of Foster Source, that we posted on Facebook Buy Sell Trade and said, are there any foster parents? We just want to talk to other foster parents. And that became a support group. In the meantime, we've all closed, and most of us have had an adoption along the way. We still meet because trauma doesn't end at finalization. And it's just that connection is just so important. And I would say for me, the second thing is EMDR. I started seeing a therapist when we were fostering to help me process the secondary trauma and the grief of fostering. And I was introduced to EMDR by my therapist, and it was life-changing for me. I still see her. I still do EMDR. And I think if foster parents can be open to working on their own mental health, it will change their journey.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Renee. And we just love you and Foster Source and everything that y'all are doing. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us today on Foster Friday Live. We'll see you
Thanks
next week.
so much for having me. Thank you.
Bye.